For decades and decades, Disney was known as a family-friendly brand with a big focus on children's animated movies. But over the past few years, the thing that used to be kind of the backbone of Disney has been brutal for them. Box office flops and failures repeatedly, whether it's from Pixar or whether it's from something like Walt Disney Animated Studios. And of course, some of the things they had planned to release in theaters that they put on streaming during COVID, that certainly didn't help. But when theaters came back, and you had flops like Lightyear, one of the biggest failures we've ever seen from Disney. To follow that up with something like Strange World, then Elemental, then Wish. And despite people's insistence that Elemental was a big success, no, it wasn't. That's a movie that needed around $600 million to break even and couldn't even crack $500 million globally. So with massive layoffs and cuts at Pixar, they were very desperate for Inside Out to be a massive success. And it was exactly that. Inside Out 2 took over the box office during summer and went on to become the biggest animated movie, not just of the year, but of all time. Inside Out 2 becomes the biggest animated movie of all time, $1.6 billion. And a lot of that could be credited to the fact that it just felt like it was a normal movie, that it wasn't pushing some type of agenda for Disney, which has been so rare over the past couple years. And as it turns out, that is exactly the case. That's what was happening internally at Disney. They told Pixar, don't put any of the gay shit in there that you guys have been putting in the past several movies. And we're finding that out from Pixar employees. They're not happy about this. They're upset about this. But in this big report from IGN, on top of complaining about studio crunch and things like that, they also bring up how upset they were that they weren't allowed to force the gay agenda into this movie. And of course, it resulted in it being the biggest animated movie of all time. I wonder if there's any correlation there. Inside Out 2 is the highest grossing animated movie ever, but behind the scenes, Pixar workers grappled with crunch, layoffs, and an avoidance of LGBTQ themes. And yes, in fact, here's some of the quotes from their Geeks and Gamers account. Inside Out 2 required edits to avoid LGBTQ themes. The edits included making the main character Riley appear less gay, as well as putting special care into making the relationship between Riley and Val seem as platonic as possible. A source describes it as, quote, just doing a lot of extra work to make sure no one would potentially see them as not straight. It looks like all that work paid off. And what I think is going on here, and we're going to get in this article a little bit from IGN, Inside Out 2 was the hit Pixar needed, but the laid-off employees who crunched on it are still hurting. What I think this is, and we've talked about this a little over the past couple years, especially with something like the D-Files from Film Threat, them talking about how so many people in the animation departments, they got rid of a lot of the old white people that worked there. They brought in a bunch of new people who had no idea what they were doing, who weren't as good at their jobs, but were very activist-minded and very diverse. I think it's a lot of people who are upset that they were crunched, or upset they're having to work hard, and were very upset they can't put their agenda into this shit. And that's one of the reasons this article is now coming out. I think it kind of looks stupid on your part when you complain about not being able to be activists and not pushing the LGBTQ agenda in this movie. And it goes on to become the most successful animated movie they've had in years, but also the most successful animated movie of all time. But let's get into the part of the article that I think is very, very interesting. And I do think that crunch is something to be talked about, especially in these animated projects. We've talked about it before with VFX studios associated with working with Marvel and how much they've had to crunch to get these projects done on time. But the truth is, when it comes to Pixar, they were in dire straits. They've suffered layoffs after layoffs because a lot of their projects have not made money over the past couple years. There were questions around Pixar, around Disney. If Inside Out 2 flops, this might be the end of Pixar as we know it, because we've seen so many failures back to back to back. For many, it's also a symbol of Pixar holding fast to an internal culture that's stubbornly set in its ways. They're very critical of Pete Docter, who is the CCO, the Chief Creative Officer for Pixar right now. With the aversion to bringing on new directors and voices. One source cites a period of time between 2020 and the release of Lightyear where the studio was more open to bringing in producers and creatives from outside its typical ranks, as well as greener filmmakers. Mann made his directorial debut on Inside Out 2, beginning development during that more experimental period in 2020. That brief period of willingness to experiment, however, didn't last long, particularly after Lightyear's financial failure. Pixar lost the desire to take risks, either in its creative appointments or its story decisions. As reported during the time, there were many reasons why Lightyear disappointed in the box office. Confusing spin-off concept, a new voice for Buzz, growing pains going from Disney Plus back to theatrical. All the fucking bullshit excuses they used in the aftermath of COVID was crazy. Sitting there while Minions is making like $1 billion at the box office, you're complaining about families not wanting to go to theaters. Go fuck yourself, all the people that made excuses for them. Doctor even admitted that it prompted a lot of soul-searching at the studio, citing some of Lightyear's conceptual and character issues. Keep in mind, we did have the gay kiss and the promotion of that, the celebration of that in the marketing for Lightyear. It's not just that they included a gay character or a gay kiss. It's the way that it was celebrated. It's the way it was marketed. It's the way it was talked about. That's what drove so many people away. Same thing with some of these other failures that they've had recently. But multiple sources say Disney leadership internally put a large part of the blame for Lightyear's financial failure on the same-sex kiss in the film, which was briefly removed and reinstated after an internal staff uproar. So let me put it this way. After a bunch of woke lunatics that you hired had a problem with you cutting gay shit out of a children's movie, you put it back in there to appease them, because that's what happens when you hire these freaks, when you hire these SJWs. They don't care about the damage it will do to your brand. All they care about is pushing their message. In a joint statement to Disney, LGBTQ workers and allies at Pixar said leadership was censoring overtly gay affection at a time where employees were also protesting the company's response to Florida's Don't Say Gay bill. That's back, 4 years ago at this point, when Bob Chapek sat there with a rainbow-colored gun pointed at the back of his head and apologized to all the gays that are employed by Disney. Now Doctor, again, the CCO of Pixar, largely uses the language of making universal stories, which to him means something that's very homogenous that anyone can relate to. Probably a good idea. The apparent hesitance to touch on LGBTQ-themed storylines in particular affected Inside Out 2's development, according to several of our sources. Multiple people recall hearing about continuous notes to make Riley, the main character of both Inside Out movies, come across as less gay, leading to numerous edits that ramped up around September 2023 after the resolution of the WGA strike. Sources describe the rumors that there was special care put into making the relationship between Riley and Val, a supporting character, seem as platonic as possible, even requiring edits to the lighting and tone of certain scenes to remove any trace of romantic chemistry. One source describes it as just doing a lot of extra work to make sure no one potentially see them as not straight. And a lot of this is because of some of the freaks that are in these weird fan bases, the shipping people, these people who will latch onto anything and everything. You know exactly the people I'm talking about. The ones, well, I need something I can identify with, and you know what? I like to fuck dudes in the ass, so this character looked at that guy a little too long. I bet he's gay. I know he's gay. He has to be. The freaks and the weirdos that make up the Acolyte fan base, these are the people I'm talking about. Disney did everything in their power to try to prevent people thinking that about these characters. And even with that, there were some people that saw the trailer and thought, oh, I think I see something there. Might be a little lesbian relationship there, because that's how these people operate. So these people are complaining. The people internally at Pixar are complaining and bitching about this, when the reality is one of the reasons that this became the biggest success that Disney Animation has had in a long time and the biggest animated movie ever is because they did this. Because they know that families don't trust them anymore. Because families will see a hint of this stuff and say, no. Guess what? Children's entertainment isn't the place to push your LGBTQ propaganda. Go fuck yourselves. I'm not going. That's why we've seen so many failures from Disney lately. And their insistence that these Pixar employees not do that in this situation is one of the reasons that this thing became the massive success that it was. We've heard internal reports that Disney knows this. A lot of different branches of Disney, they are getting away from this stuff because they know how cancerous it is, especially for stuff that's targeted towards children. And it paid off in a big way for Inside Out too. And now the activists and the weirdos and the freaks that are still employed, they're not very happy that they weren't allowed to push their agenda in this movie. What do you guys think about this? Let me know in the comments section below. Smash a like button, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications, share this video out there, and I'll talk to you later.